Ryan Nobles from CNN. Did you watch Roseanne last night?
I didn't, Bill, and I really wanted to. You know, the thing about the two Beckys, that's very similar to you and your radio sidekicks. Don't you make them all have the same exact name?
It's easier to transition the email addresses, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that
good
makes
point.
No, I'm sad I missed it. I love the first version of Roseanne, and I was looking forward to this one. So
well,
I'll have to catch up with it later.
It'll be on demand, right? But I thought it's very interesting, too, how she's pro-Trump and her sister is anti-Trump, and they're like going at it, and some of the jokes are pretty funny. The other one we were mentioning is Will and Grace has that same back and forth, although some of the stuff that comes out of their mouths, holy moly in the morning. It's out there. So all right.
It doesn't matter where you go, you can't escape Trump.
You
even
cannot.
On your favorite,
you cannot. I want to ask you before we get into politics. Mike says the NFL head-down rule is just going to push more towards New York City reviewing exactly the opposite of what they're trying to accomplish. Do you agree with that? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I am worried about that. You know what I told you before about replay? The more that you can dissect these rulings, the more length of the game that's going to take place, and the more nitpicking of every single play.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the more they allow the officials on the field to make the final call, and the shorter they give them to get that decision-making process done, the better. But I don't know if you can ever uncork the bottle of replay. I just think that's kind of become what it's become.
Well, look what they're trying to do in baseball. It's been suggested that that it's computers and cameras that actually call balls and strikes. I mean, wouldn't that be?
Oh, come on.
I think that is the greatest thing of all time. I've advocated for this for years. I've said it on this show before.
No, that's
Are you
terrible
it's
idea.
the greatest thing
that
in the world.
Is
yes,
stupid.
100%
stupid.
100%.
I mean,
What happened if it's not calibrated? It's calling balls. It should be strikes the whole game.
Yeah, like a regular umpire, you mean?
Yeah, well,
who constantly gives one pitcher 4 inches outside, the other one gets 4 inches inside.
Part of the game.
Hey, Ryan, I had
a bad part of the game.
When my son was playing baseball, Little League, and Todd, you know who you are, I was one of the umpires, and he'd say, listen, just so you know, I don't care where the ball is. I don't call balls. We don't walk in my game. And
you're swinging or you're sitting.
I'm like, Todd, the bat would have to be 10 feet long to hit that. I don't care. Step out of the box. Hit that ball.
Hitter's hit.
You know, that's every umpire has their philosophy.
I've had another umpire tell me before, I'm not here to be paid to call balls, so that's not why they pay me.
Yeah, well, all right. So, where do we begin? How about the Stormy Daniels? What do you think? What do you think? Anderson Cooper seemed to do a pretty good job.
Yeah.
We didn't really learn much.
Do you not think so?
You didn't think so, Ryan?
Yeah, I don't think it was all that revelatory, which I think we talked about last week. That there was this danger that there was so much hype surrounding it that it wasn't going to deliver. You know, the fact that she was physically threatened with her daughter in the car was perhaps the biggest tidbit. You know, I'm actually kind of more interested in the fact that 22 million people watched, which is, you know, that's a number of bygone days on television. You just don't see that kind of viewership for that kind of a program.
Certainly 60 Minutes hasn't in over a decade.
Yeah, and I think that indicates that the American public is interested in this story. Now, whether or not they're interested in it because they think the president did something wrong or because it's got a tabloidy feel to it, I think are two different things. But I think what it demonstrates more than anything is that the president can't just ignore this problem and hope that it goes away. And what our reporting from our White House team is telling us is that the president's been specifically told not to engage on this topic, to avoid it at all costs, which he has done. He gave kind of a cryptic tweet yesterday about all the fake news is piling up in voluminous numbers or something along those lines. But they feel as though his poll numbers actually ticked up a little bit this week, that this is not something that's necessarily damaged him. Certainly his base hasn't left him.
Yeah.
And the only danger that could come from him is if he decides to engage and turn this into a bigger deal than it already is. So he's just going to continue to ignore it at this point. I don't know how long he can do that for.
Well, and the lawyer, and I'm going to say this, the lawyer was on The View the day after. And I think it was Meghan.
He's been all over the place.
And I think it was Meghan McCain who asked him, the lawyer, about what happened to me yesterday. Go on. I'm sorry.
Okay. What the hell is going on?
What is wrong with me?
This happens to me,
I
too.
had a point.
He's so enamored by you, Ryan.
That's what it is. Yeah.
He just can't. I want to ask you about something that I got to tell you, I can give you 3 conservative friends that I've spoken to that are now sending me text messages that say #DumpTrump.
Really?
These are strong, have been strong supporters of Trump because, not necessarily strong supporters of Trump, but strong supporters because that's how they were going to be able to get the agenda to move forward. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the president signed that bill extending the budget,
the omnibus budget, right?
I got to tell you, I'm hearing people that are that feel that he's crossed the line. A, not draining the swamp. B, the fact that it involved money for Planned Parenthood and public television, et cetera, et cetera. What are you hearing? And are you hearing the same thing I'm hearing?
And also what it didn't include, Bill, no funding for the border wall, no DACA solution, no immigration changes. Yeah. I mean, I think that there are a lot of conservatives that are disappointed that this is the kind of bill that Republicans that control all 3, the House, the Senate, and the executive branch delivered. This was the kind of bill that they railed against when they were in the minority and when Barack Obama was president. So the idea that this is the kind of package that they're producing is by no means draining the swamp. And I think the other thing that I could see Trump supporters may be getting a little discouraged by, it seemed as though he was so late to the game in this conversation, as if the negotiations for the omnibus happened without him, and then all of a sudden this 3,000-page bill shows up on his doorstep, and Congress is basically on its way out of town. He's heading to Mar-a-Lago, and then he decides he wants to veto the bill. Like, if you didn't want to be a part of this process, and if you wanted the bill to be stronger or not include certain things, why weren't you engaged before the bill got passed by, the party that you're a member of, and that you have, direct conversations with the leadership? So I think that's where maybe people start to, the shine starts to go off of Trump, because the idea was that he was going to be the kind of negotiator that could go into a room with Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer and come out with a deal that his base would be happy with. So far, it hasn't translated into that. And when you continue to see these things like the way this omnibus bill was passed, where the president didn't appear to do any negotiating, you start to wonder, when are we actually going to see results?
How about the thing that the president is kind of floating out there, and I've heard this for a couple of days now, is that he's going to use money from the military to build the wall. What do you think?
I think this is an example of, and I actually think this could be a positive thing about the Donald Trump presidency if he found a way to channel it. But I think that he sits in a room and they start talking about funding and where it comes from, and he sees piles of money in this department and piles of money in that department, and he says, if we got all this money over here, why can't we just use this for that? And I think that there's probably a lot of average Americans sitting around their kitchen table that see that this department is, overfunded by a certain quotient, and this department needs more money. Why can't we just move money from this bucket over to that bucket? Well, unfortunately, the federal government doesn't work like that. There's a budgeting process for a reason, and you can't just, move money from one place to the other. But he's trying this out-of-the-box thinking. I think it's a little interesting that he's choosing to take it from the military.
Oh, I think that's dangerous.
Which he's been touting the fact that he has, pushed so much funding back into the military. Why would he now suggest to get the money out?
And for those conservatives who are saying, listen, what he did was wrong, I'm giving him a pass because he had to fund the military.
Yeah,
and then to take that money and use it for the wall, boy, I got to tell you, I think that's dangerous. And that's why I think it's just being floated out there right now, to be honest.
Yeah, and I also think that this is a sign of, maybe desperation is too far of a term, but I think it shows that they're running out of options, that, there isn't just this pool of funding that's going to come from somewhere that they could just magically pull out of a hat and then build this wall. I mean, clearly Mexico is not going to pay for it. Another idea he floated was increasing the fee that people pay as they come into the United States as a way to fund the wall, and that would kind of be the way that he could say that Mexico is going to pay for it. He paints himself into these corners in a lot of respects, where he makes these declarative statements about how he's going to do something, and this is how he's going to get it done, and then all of a sudden he's met with the reality of it, and he's kind of at an impasse, and I think that's the example of what he's dealing with right now.
Interesting.
Right, and I don't want to go too far off topic. It was mentioned earlier that there was funding for Planned Parenthood in here. I saw conflicting reports initially whether there was or there wasn't. Is there? And what's the reaction been on that?
Yeah, there's definitely money for Planned Parenthood in there. And you know what? There's always money for Planned Parenthood in the federal budget. They've tried for years to strip it from the budget back when, Republicans had control of everything, and somehow it hangs on. There's a provision specifically associated with it that they cannot use that funding to pay for abortions. You can argue whether or not, any money that goes into Planned Parenthood ultimately finds its way into providing abortions one way or the other. But that money's in there, and that was part of the deal that Paul Ryan had to hatch in order to get Democrats into the fold. I mean, the unwritten story about this omnibus bill was that, there were a lot of Republicans that opposed it. And the only way that they were going to get it over the finish line was to get Democrats to vote for it. And that's how they ultimately got the bill passed. And that's shaky ground for Paul Ryan when he's got to bring in, a big cadre of Democrats to get a bill over the finish line. It's not going to end up being the kind of bill that conservatives thought they were voting for. But that's the reality of Washington right now.
Like I said, I don't want to sidebar this too much, but this relates to the show. It just makes me wonder how someone like Sue feels about Claudia Tenney, who supported this bill, Donald Trump, who supported this bill, when there's funding for that in here.
I got to tell you, and maybe this is just my take on it, but I felt like up to this point, Claudia Tenney really is voting with President Trump. Wherever President Trump goes, Tenney goes. Whatever President Trump says, Tenney takes it 10 steps further and says something crazy. But what I found interesting is here Tenney votes for this with the president, and then you have the president coming out and saying, I'm going to veto it. I'm going to be like, she's going to have to try to veto her vote. What's she going to do?
I hit the wrong button.
Lord almighty.
So I remember what I was going to say.
Oh, you do?
My gosh. So it was about the Twitter thing, and I thought this was really interesting. So the lawyer was trying to say on The View that, well, isn't it interesting that President Trump will come out and I will concede that he kind of did this to himself because he does tweet a lot of things and a lot of denials, but is the not coming out and calling Stormy a liar, is that an admission of guilt, do you think?
Well, I mean, I certainly think that there's...
that's the stretch he was trying to make.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument to be made there, right? I mean, the President of the United States does not hesitate to go and attack a junior member of the Congress that will give him a tiny slight in a town hall somewhere out of the middle of nowhere. He'll be not afraid to use his powerful Twitter feed to do that. But here you have this woman who just went on television with 22 million viewers and basically accused him of trying to solicit her as a prostitute because she tried to offer him money,
right,
for sex, which she turned down. So, and he yet stayed silent on that. So, when you have somebody, and I think that that's kind of a point that a lot of people have tried to drill down this week, is when you have someone who never resists the opportunity to engage in a topic, particularly in a topic where he's under attack. The fact that he is not engaging in this particular topic, is that some sort of admission of guilt?
Yeah.
Certainly that wouldn't hold up in a court of law, but in a court of public opinion, it certainly has to raise some eyebrows, I would think.
I actually, and people are going to call me crazy, but I honestly believe he had no idea about this payment, about this agreement, because why wouldn't he have signed it? If the argument is that the contract's invalid because Donald Trump didn't sign it, why would he not sign it?
Fantasy world.
Why wouldn't he sign it? Why was his signature not on the page?
I wouldn't sign it if I were him either, because you sign it, then
he knows if a contract's not signed by all parties, it's invalidated. I know that as a realtor, and he knows a lot more than me.
It also shows that that if it ever got out, his name is signed to it. You don't want to put your name on that.
Well, it was his alias, too.
The whether or not the president, or at that time the candidate, had direct knowledge of whether or not this payment was made, I think is almost a moot point.
It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
Well, she's saying...
It doesn't matter what she says. It's irrelevant, Ryan, because you can't prove it. He has he's able to deny that he knew, and I think he has that.
And I mean, but it doesn't remove him of any culpability in this situation. Michael Cohen was his lawyer. When a lawyer is acting on your behalf, that's an extension of you. Whether or not he claims that he did it without the president's knowledge or did it in his personal capacity, I mean, that's a murky line. I mean, you talk to enough lawyers that will tell you that is a very, they're walking on a very thin line there.
I'm out of time, Ryan. It's not because Andrew's mad at you. There's no conspiracy
I'm not mad. I was just
here.
curious. I just want a question. It was just a question.
Ryan, good stuff. Thank you. We'll do it again next week.